I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to share with you my story of my underwater remote operated vehicle, or ROV, which I have named Dragon Beaver, because as a proud Canadian, we're very proud of our beavers, and somehow Dragon just seemed to add a little more oomph to the name. So this is Dragon Beaver version 1. So what I'm going to walk you through is the number of the steps I went through and some of my experiences in the beginning. To begin with, my requirements for my ROV were that it was affordable, that it was adaptable, that it was not bleeding edge technology, so I didn't have the time or the budget to be really playing around with experimental stuff, and that the whole thing would be a learning journey. So to begin with, I started planning more than a year ago in the summer, probably before that, where I was looking online or looking at other people's experiments of what they did with ROVs, and finding the whole field very interesting in terms of a hobbyist side of things. Then over the summer, because we camp a lot, we spend a lot of time in different lakes, I started looking at the places we go to see, are there places where I could actually use an ROV? We've got many lakes where it's not clear. The river through my own city, I could never use the ROV in, very muddy. But it turned out there were a number of lakes that were very clear that I would be able to play around in. The next thing then for me was the build. And so I'm going to break that down into 5 distinct parts. The electrical, the electronics, the software, the hull, and the frame. So to begin with the hull, as you'll see, it's ABS. I went as simple as possible, trying to use parts that I could easily seal up and waterproof, and I knew had a history of waterproofing. Plumbing seemed to be the way to go. But then it's all ABS except for the plastic in the front for the camera. Obviously that's some clear plastic that I just happened to find in an office supply store that was closing down. The frame that I attached the hull to is PVC and a wire basket, actually from a freezer. And the reason I went with a frame is to kind of give some landing gear to separate it out from the hull, have places to attach, the camera mount and the lights. Now, in terms of the electrical, there are 6 bilge pumps. The LEDs are just cheap, small LED panels that I bought off of eBay and in a plastic housing that I'm not very impressed with. In terms of electronics, so what I went with is the Arduino for microcontroller board and a relay board. And they provided me the functionality that I needed to be able to control the ROV from the surface, but also it gave me some options for down the road. In terms of the software, the Arduino has a sketch. So the sketch defines each pin in the program, and then the program sits waiting, and when a numeric value that it's waiting for appears, it turns on. At top side on the surface, the laptop that's hooked up by USB to the Arduino, all it does is opens up the serial port, and if you click on a certain button, it'll send a number which is connected to a motor. Or if you click off, it turns everything off. In terms of the building, aside from the ABS and the normal glue for that, there is epoxy at all those points where the wires go through. There's shoe glue on top of that because I found the epoxy to be brittle. The stiff wire for some of the attachments of some of the pieces and touching the hull to the frame, and lots of zip ties. Now, as you'll see in the video, my first testing was at a lake with a lot of algae, but that just happened to be the first lake we were at where I had the ROV as ready as I thought I was to give it a first go. I discovered there were some small leaks, which I was able to resolve. I had done some pressure testing prior to there where I actually had drilled a separate hole, attached a compressor at as low as it would go, put soap on all the holes that went through, all the seals, essentially everything had soapy water, attached the compressor, and I found leaks. So when I did the testing that first time, the leaks were really because I hadn't used the Teflon tape properly, and so it got in through there, or I hadn't tightened it up enough, and so that seemed to get resolved. At the first testing, I discovered how badly the lens fogs with the humid air getting into the hull, and of course the temperature dropping in the lake. And the other thing I had a problem with is water getting into the USB cable. The USB cables I have a little signal booster built into them, and that's where the water would get in. So that's something I need to work on, obviously. Also discovered in this first time is just a lot of issues with balancing and neutral buoyancy. And as you can see in the video, the major algae. So it was not easy to navigate. So you're really just trying to see if it would move around. But once it dropped below the surface, even the slightest bit, I couldn't really see it. And so there's no real video of that. And in this sample video, you can see just how dark it gets really quickly. After the second testing with some changes made, I didn't have a lot of time because we camp a lot and then I have other things going on. And so I didn't get a chance to make any of the major changes. But I had no hull leaks after that. The lens is still fogging, albeit less because I was putting in those little absorbent packages in there. But it still did fog to the point where very quickly I couldn't use it for navigating. And so I kind of luckily the water was very clear and I could see. The USB cable, even though I resealed them, I left the connecting housings in there so you could technically still unplug each of the USB connectors underneath the glue and the sealant. And I think that was my mistake. So water still was getting into there. And in fact, to the point where that was where I ended up getting shut down, was just water getting into those components. And I was still working on some balance issues. You can see in the video, it's definitely leaning to one side. In that second testing, I was using rocks to balance it out, and of course, rocks aren't all the same size. The other thing I found difficult to account for, and I'll have to work into next year, is the hoses all start out with air in them. Which is fine in the beginning, but once you actually get the ROV down and all the pumps have worked, then all the air is gone, and then that's when you find out exactly what the buoyancy is like. So plans ahead for me, I definitely want to separate the camera into its own housing and seal it off so that there's no moist air coming in there and that it can stay clear on the lens. I have to look at some anti-fogging agent perhaps, and just make that a little bit better because it's not as much fun without being able to see. I need to redo the USB cable. Obviously, that's a major thing. I had no issues with 45 feet of USB cable. Very tempted next year with redoing the cables to get a little more out of it. The reality is by operating off the boat in fairly shallow areas, it wasn't an issue, but it would be nice to have some option there. Love to put a manipulator arm off the front to scoop up something into a basket, but we'll see whether I get that far. Waterproofing a manipulator arm and just making that work is something that I haven't even started to research yet. And obviously I'd want to do it on the cheap. My Visual Basic app needs to receive keyboard commands because I'll be honest, clicking while you're trying to see the screen is not ideal because trying to figure out where that mouse is. I had no problem with seeing the screen and the navigation of the camera in the LCD while on the boat, but seeing where the mouse was a different issue. That's it for my story of my ROV. If you have any questions, just put it down in the comments and I will do my best to respond. I will post a link to the sketch and the VB and as much instructions as I can for anyone who wants to, if they're hacking their own and they want to use parts of my ideas, feel free.